Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Week 4 in the books. Time to update the Big Ten power rankings heading into Week 5. And look, I think there are a lot of hot takes within these power rankings within the Big Ten. I think most notably what jumps out the screen, USC staying ahead of Michigan in my personal Big Ten power rankings. And I understand that's a very hot take because we just saw Michigan beat USC at home. Look, I'm a Michigan fan. A lot of y'all know that. What I think we saw in that football game was, yeah, Michigan made some plays to win that football game. And I think for a lot of Michigan fans, there's this newfound confidence that, maybe Michigan can be really competitive running the football and playing good defense. But in my mind, I looked at that football game and said, how many times out of 10 is Michigan beating USC playing that style of football? I think the short answer is probably not more than 5. And so I'm going USC over Michigan. I'll get more into that as we go throughout this episode. Now, before we get into it, as always, again, with the hot takes, let it fly in the comments section. I know there are going to be a lot of people that disagree with this. And quite frankly, I've been wrong plenty about the Big Ten to start the 2024 season. So let it fly in the comments section. That is the beauty of doing this. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start at the top tier, and that is title contenders, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. I think they've probably separated themselves in terms of the top dogs in the Big Ten. Ohio State continues to kind of play to the roster. Like, we know this Ohio State roster is one of, if not the most talented roster that we've seen all of college football. Although they haven't been tested, they've played to the talent level on that roster. The Oregon Ducks, again, you saw them put it together against Oregon State, specifically in that second half. Really complete team if they play like that. Again, the biggest problem going in for Oregon was the offensive line throughout the first two games. They kind of made some changes. They went with Nishad Strother at the guard spot. Their Oregon offensive line played its best football against Oregon State. And, I think a lot of the Oregon fans who've watched every single snap of this Oregon Ducks team know if you can run the football and pass protect better for Dylan Gabriel, this offense is going to put up a lot of points. That's what we saw against Oregon State. So feel better about having Oregon number 2. Penn State coming in at number 3. I think it's been a probably a rocky road for Penn State. Obviously, Bowling Green might just be a good team. Like, they went on the road and played Texas A&M relatively tough as well. The reason I'm staying high on Penn State, and we're going to see a phenomenal game between Penn State and Illinois coming up, the reason I'm staying high on Penn State is that the offense is explosive. And that's the biggest difference from what we saw in 2023 was they just couldn't manufacture any explosive plays, whether it was in the rushing game, whether it was in the passing game. Although the Penn State offense has been choppy at times in terms of efficiency, they're providing you those explosive plays, which will help you give you a shot to beat teams like Ohio State and Oregon at the top of the Big Ten. So I'm going to lean into Penn State figuring out the efficiency of this offense. But if they can maintain as explosive as they've been on offense and play the defense that we know they can play, keeping Penn State in that title contender tier, going to the dark horse tier. And let's start with this, right? USC over Michigan. Again, I'm a Michigan fan. This isn't like, I don't feel great about it because we just saw Michigan beat USC. But I think a lot of Michigan fans understand that I think there needs to be some new elements to this offense injected into this group within the next couple of weeks, which I think very well could happen, right? This was the first start for Alex Orji. I think they're going to give him more scheme and more concepts that, kind of lean towards what Alex Orji can do best. In the first half, they were really creative with that run game, and they had some things that worked. And then the second half, they kind of lost that creativity, weren't able to stay on the football field. That's my biggest concern. Like, how consistently can Michigan win football games at the top of the Big Ten, having an offense that, goes 3-and-out and only runs 9 plays in the third quarter of a football game? I'm not sure how replicable that win is. That being said, again, there's some confidence brewing within this Michigan program. USC knocked them from a title contender to a dark horse, really for one reason. Look, this USC defense continues to really impress me. Like, you can tell this is a different kind of defense that Coach Lynn has injected into this program. Quite frankly, I think the USC team in general feels a little bit different. The reason I'm knocking them from a title contender to a dark horse, the pass protection. I mean, again, that's probably the best defensive line that USC will see all year. My biggest concern is if you want to win at the highest level of the Big Ten or at the highest level of college football, you have to have better pass protection than what USC had specifically in that first half. If they can figure that out, like this is a USC team that I think is really dangerous because I think Miller Moss is a baller. Like I was really impressed with Miller Moss and how he played, considering how much pressure that was brought on him. I think Lincoln Riley came out in the first half and just didn't really call his best offense. And we know Lincoln Riley can call plays. I just don't think the game plan was necessarily great, which is frustrating because they were coming off a bye. You kind of expect them to have a really good script to start the game. But the USC defense continues to be different. I think Miller Moss is a much better quarterback than a lot of people in the national media wanted to give credit for. The run game got going. If they can figure out pass protection, this is going to be a dangerous team. Illinois, next team. This is not a team that's going to jump out of the paper in terms of talent, in terms of headlining names. They're really, really complete. Yeah, I think Luke Altmaier is playing the best football that we've seen him play during his college football career. And look, Luke Altmaier was a former four-star prospect, top 200 national kid. Luke Altmaier can play. I think he was inconsistent in 2023. The defense obviously was not very good in 2023. I think Luke Altmaier is playing better. I think the offensive line is probably better as well. I mean, there are many teams, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country that I think can physically impose their will on that Nebraska defensive line. Illinois kind of did that in the second half. And I think for an Illinois fan, like you're really excited about the balance that this offense has. You can run the football, but you also have two NFL caliber wide receivers in Franklin and Pat Bryant on the outside. And with how good Luke Allmeyer's been playing, this is an Illinois team that's going to be a tough out. I think we're going to learn a lot about Penn State and Illinois this weekend in Happy Valley. Fired up for that game. Nebraska, keeping them as a dark horse team. I'll tell you why. I think Dylan Raiola is the real deal. I think Nebraska, look, their defense kind of lost in that football game against Illinois Friday night. We got a lot of sample size from Nebraska's defense going back to 2023 with Tony White. They played a bad game against Illinois. Am I going to focus on one bad game that this Nebraska defense played, or am I going to focus on the other 18 football games that Tony White has coached that he's done a really, really good job with? I'm going to focus on the bigger sample size of this Nebraska defense being good. Although a frustrating loss, I'm not going to panic about this Nebraska defense. And I think, secondly, like Dylan Raiola continues to impress me. The Nebraska fans who've been listening to me going off on him in the summer, like I had really high expectations, arguably too high of expectations for a true freshman. He's just about surpassed every expectation I've had. And the pocket composure is elite. The arm talent is elite. He's keeping the football out of harm's way. Both interceptions that Dylan has on the season were really good footballs that the defense just kind of made plays on. And so I'm keeping my stock with Nebraska as being that dangerous team in the Big Ten. Going to teams to watch, hand up, was wrong about Indiana. I might still have Indiana lower than they should be. I mean, they're undefeated. You take a look at the numbers, 41.7 points per game. That's 12th in the country. They're only allowing 11.3 points per game. That's 10th in the country. They have one of the best turnover margins that you see in all of college football. I wasn't really sure what to expect with just this brand new, not only Indiana coaching staff, but the brand new roster that Kirk Cignetti brought over. It's looking the part. Like I was probably I definitely missed on Indiana. Like I was not very high on them to start the 2024 season. They certainly are making me look like an idiot. A lot of these teams are making me look like an idiot. I might just be an idiot, but Indiana is, I think, the real deal. Looking at Rutgers, the thing that stands out to me about Rutgers, one really impressive win on the road against Virginia Tech, a hard place to play, and quite frankly, I think a team that's pretty good in the ACC. The thing that stands out to me about Rutgers, what do we say about Rutgers coming in? They're going to play really good defense and just run the football. That's kind of what they're doing, but they're playing much better on offense. They're running the football a lot, top 15 rush rate in the country, but they're putting up 37.5 points per game, which is 20th best in the country, largely because the passing attack is explosive. Now, they're not going to throw the ball 50 times a game, but when they do try to throw it, they're being explosive. 10.4 yards per pass attempt. That's number 8 in the country. If Rutgers can maintain that recipe of playing really good defense, running the football, but now sprinkling in that explosive passing attack when they do decide to throw it, That's a winning recipe for this Rutgers program. Right behind them, the matchup they have Friday night, the Washington Huskies, a team that, again, a probably team that I missed on heading into 2024 for the wrong. I was probably higher than most on Washington, but I was higher on most for the wrong reasons. You look at what stood out about Washington throughout the first couple of games. Their defensive front's been elite. Their defense in general's been really good, right? 12.7 points per game allowed. That's 12th best in the country. 2.9 yards per carry allowed. 16th in the country. They're sacking the quarterback 10% of dropbacks. That's 12th in the country. I was a believer in Washington because of Jed Fish, Will Rogers, and this Washington offense, which has been solid. They need to finish some more drives in the red zone, but it's been pretty dang good. They probably should be an undefeated team right now. But man, this defense, specifically the front seven, that was the biggest question mark we had. Do they have the front seven to compete in the Big Ten after losing all those bodies to the transfer portal and to the NFL draft? They largely have done that. Last team I want to have in this tier, the Iowa Hawkeyes. I think they got one of the best running backs in the country, and Caleb Johnson. You take a look at Caleb Johnson's numbers, over 600 yards on the ground throughout the first 4 games. He's averaging 8.5 yards per carry. But then you look deeper into this Iowa offense and say Caleb Johnson's 5.7 yards after contact per carry. He's got 18 runs of 10 plus yards, 30 missed tackles forced. We spent all this time talking about the new Iowa offense. It's kind of looking the same, but the biggest thing we talked about with Iowa's offense was just the lack of difference makers on offense. You can talk about scheme all you want. Iowa just didn't have enough talent to consistently put points up on the board in the Big Ten. They got a guy now, and Caleb Johnson. And if he stays healthy, he is a running back that you can ride throughout the 2024 season to give you some of those explosive plays. Right now, he's one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, probably second to just what you see at Ohio State. Caleb Johnson's been a dude. They've been explosive running the football. They're obviously still playing good defense. I don't think this Iowa offense is going to look any different. Well, it's going to look a little different from the schematics of it, but with that outside zone run game, which they've been known to run, I think Caleb Johnson runs that really well. They got a difference maker on offense, which is something you couldn't say about Iowa for the last couple of years. I think that's the biggest difference between the offense in 2023 to 2024. Bottom half of the Big Ten. And again, I think you're seeing how deep the Big Ten is. Like Michigan State just went on the road, played a one-score game with Boston College, who has the number 4 team in the ACC. The Big Ten is deep. The SEC might have better top-end teams than the Big Ten in terms of having, 6 teams in the top 8, I believe, and the AP top 25. But you talk about depth of the Big Ten. Like Michigan State played Boston College extremely tough. They have obviously a very exciting young quarterback in Aiden Childs, who, man, he's still trying to figure it out. He has some turnovers that just make you scratch your head, but he is arguably one of the most talented quarterbacks in this conference. If he continues to get a little bit better, and not better in terms of talent, because we know he has the talent, but just better about turning the football over, this is a tough Michigan State team. Maryland's just gritty. Like Billy Edwards, gritty player. Wisconsin, I think I was pretty high on Wisconsin going into year 2 with Luke Fickell. They lose their starting quarterback. There's not a ton that I look at with Wisconsin and say I love that about their team. I think they're still trying to find their identity on offense. They're not running the football that well. Now they're going to a backup quarterback. They're not throwing the football that well. They play solid defense, but not elite defense. I just don't really think there's anything really right now to hang your hat on if you're a Wisconsin fan. UCLA, pretty solid performance on the road against LSU, specifically in that first half. Again, for UCLA, it's like, what's the identity of this offense? Not running the football that well. Is Ethan Garbers a quarterback that you can rely on to win you football games? If you can't run the football, the offensive line's been the biggest problem. It's been a disaster in pass protection. Minnesota, Purdue, Northwestern to round it out. Look, I don't feel great about it. I think maybe Indiana should go up to the dark horse category. Quite frankly, Rutgers, Washington, whoever wins that, probably going to the dark horse category after week 5. You know what? I'm going to say that. Indiana, I'm going to put them at the dark horse category because I went back and just watched a little bit more Indiana. I continue to be really impressed with that team. Kind of similar to Illinois. I don't think there's particular players that necessarily jump out to you, but it is a very, very solid football program. That's where we're going with this. Again, subject to change as we get into Big Ten conference play. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to y'all later.